Well, they got that far.
Right? No. See, so just remember this, Edward.
What's that?
Just gotta see what they eat. I wash, clean. I'll play it. So it's like this.
That always...
We had an all-expense-paid trip to a foreign country. Now, some of you might remember that gorgeous ocean liner, and maybe some of you don't. But tonight we've got the radio man from the Mount Vernon with us. And he's going to tell us a little bit that we might have forgotten about the Mount Vernon and maybe something we didn't know about it. For instance, way back when it used to be the Washington Line and it was a luxury liner and so on and so on. I'd like to introduce Norman Wackel, the radio man on the Mount Vernon.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to come over here, Norm?
Well, and everybody, yeah, I'll talk a little louder. I'll turn my hearing aid off and then I'll talk louder. Well, thank you, Bud. And it's with pleasure that I come here to present the few facts that I have on the Mount Vernon, and I trust that you will enjoy them. Several of the people I've talked with even know, so we'll embellish on those as well. The Mount Vernon was a passenger liner built sometime in the 30s, and she was built for the U.S. lines. The U.S. lines was subsidized by the U.S. government. In case of any emergency, the U.S. government could reach out, put their hands on the Mount Vernon. It was not called the Mount Vernon in the beginning, it was the U.S. Washington. And there was also another ship, the U.S. Manhattan, that was a sister ship to it. And then there was another ship called the America, which was bigger than the Mount Vernon. And those three, as far as I know, were the three that were subsidized by the U.S. government. Well, quite early, before 1940, I have a picture. I couldn't get a picture of it after it was war gray. The security and so on, they tell you you can't have a picture of such things. At least not a Navy guy can. But anyway, I do have a picture of the U.S. Washington as she was prior to being taken over by the Navy. The government took it over either very late 40 or early 41, and it was given to the Army, and it was called the USAT Washington, United States Army Transport. And she made 2 trips that I know of from the west coast of the United States to the Philippines to bring back families, because things were getting a little itchy about that time, and they were trying to get the families out of the Philippines. Well, on the one trip, when they came back, I have to look up the date, I don't remember, but it was in late May. It came back into Frisco with a load of women and children mostly, and other members, and they were discharged at San Francisco. I was attached to an organized Naval Reserve unit from Houghton and Hancock, and our unit, along with 2 other units of Naval Reserve, went aboard, and we were supposed to be the crew. But the Army had it under charter or under something, so the Army ran it. We rode as passengers for the Army, and we left on June 2nd of '41 and went down the west coast through Panama and up the east coast to Philadelphia. Well, there they had a ceremony, and it was officially given up by the Army Transport, and the Navy took it over. But while we were there, they put on a lot of life rafts. They put on some additional lifeboats. They put on a 5-inch gun on the after deck, and they put on a lot of 20 millimeter and 50 millimeter machine guns, this sort of thing. And we were supposed to be an APA ship, an attack transport. But anyway, we loaded up with troops later on, and we went down to the maneuvers that were held off the coast of South Carolina in 1941. And they had ships, I don't know how many, hundreds of ships down there. And they went through all sorts of maneuvers, and we fired our 5-inch gun, and when we did, half of our light bulbs broke in the sockets, water pipes going through the ship sprung leaks. We were just a mess from firing a 1 5-inch gun. What would we do if we had an attack? But anyway, we survived that. We brought the troops back to New York. Then from New York, we went up to Boston to get further refitted and to get things fixed so that we could fire the 5-inch gun. The problem was, apparently, the ship, being a passenger ship, was built of, well, I would say rather thin metal compared to a battleship. And when they fired a 5-inch gun, the metal just buckled, it shivered, so to speak, and it just shook everything. So that was why we had the problems. But anyway, we went up to Boston, and we spent about 6 weeks in Boston getting further refitted and things done. We finally left there and went up to Halifax. And at Halifax, we got in there about the 10th of November. And we sat at the dock, and 3 ships came in from England with British troops. They were intern ships. One of them was a Danish, one a Dutch, and one a German ship. And we took the passengers on those 3 ships aboard the Mount Vernon. And the 4 guys marched down the gangplank onto the dock, down the dock, and up the gangplank, and we sailed. They said, we went to America to see America, and what did we see? So it was too bad. Well, anyway, we took off from there on the 11th of November, and we headed south. Now, this was prior to Pearl Harbor, about a month before Pearl Harbor. We were doing strictly non-military duty, hauling British troops. So anyway, we went down, we stopped in at Trinidad to get fuel, and then from Trinidad, we started to cross the Atlantic, the South Atlantic. We got a message in our radio circuit that a German ship, Python, which was a submarine tender, was going to refuel 4 German submarines 400 miles south of St. Helena. St. Helena, if you recall, is the island that Napoleon was exiled to. Well, anyway, that would have been right on our course. So we went down the coast of South America, almost to Rio de Janeiro, before we cut across to Cape Town. A few days later, we got the news report from the British Admiralty that the Dorsetshire had gone in and sank the Python. So we continued on. Next day we got another report from the British Admiralty that the Dorsetshire, which was a British cruiser, had gone in to pick up survivors, and she was torpedoed by the submarines. Well, then the next day, we were a day out of Cape Town, we got news of Pearl Harbor. We got into Pearl Harbor on the 8th, and the following day, the Dorsetshire steamed in without a scratch on her. So you couldn't believe what you were getting. In fact, somebody had told me one time that even the Mount Vernon had been reported sunk, and we never got a scratch the whole war. So that's the way it went. Well, anyway, we laid in Cape Town then, thinking that we'd have a change of orders because of the war breaking out. But we didn't. We got orders to take these British troops to Bombay. So we went up the Indian Ocean. We were about halfway to Bombay. We got orders changing us to go into Mombasa, East Africa, which is 4 degrees off the equator. We got in there on Christmas Day. What a Christmas present. And we did get liberty there, some of us, but they had just gotten through with the yellow fever epidemic. We had to get inoculations for yellow fever before we go ashore. But anyway, when we got in there, we were told that that was a mistake for us to go in there. So then they redirected us to Singapore. So we went in there, and we were fortunate in that we met up with other ships and made a convoy to go in, and we went in to the dry dock. And the Japs came back every day, and they were bombing everything, but they wouldn't bomb the dry dock. In fact, they later got the dry dock without any damage. So, as I say, we didn't have any attack while we were there, but we got out of there as fast as we could. So anyway, when we did start out, we had a Norwegian ship following us, and we were escorted by a British Q-boat, little sub-chaser, I guess you'd call it. And they could only go about 10, 12 knots, so we were going that speed when the Norwegian ship got a torpedo. So our captain says, you go ahead. We steamed up. Normally we cruised at 20 knots, but they shut off the refrigeration, they shut off the water making equipment, they shut off everything they could. We steamed at 22 knots, the fastest we had ever gone. We got out of there. So then from there, we thought, well, now we'll go to Durban, pick up our mail, go back to the States. But then we got a change of orders because we were attached to the British fleet down there. We got a change of orders to go to Aden, Arabia. So we went up there and laid there 4 or 5 days, and then we went on up to Suez to pick up a load of Aussies that had been chasing Rommel all over North Africa. And we got them aboard, and then we came down, we stopped at Colombo Ceylon to pick up fuel, and while we were there, the British Admiralty wanted us to go into Surabaya, which is one of the islands south of Singapore, to take the troops in there. And our captain said, no way. He said, Surabaya is too small a harbor. We can't maneuver in there. And we'd be sitting ducks. So he wanted them to put the troops on small boats. They'd have a much better chance, and they wouldn't do it. So we radioed from our radio shack. We radioed Corregidor. Corregidor at that time was completely surrounded. They knew that they were done, but they were still handling traffic, and they handled our traffic to Washington to get orders. And then we got the answer back the next day that we were to proceed to Australia, which we did. So we got into Perth. We left off some of the Aussies there, but we took on about 600 survivors, American survivors, that were on the Langley and Pecos. The Langley was an aircraft tender, Pecos was a tanker. The Langley was sunk, its survivors were picked up by the Pecos, most of them, and the next day the Pecos was sunk. And some of the survivors were picked up by a little destroyer by the name of Whipple. And then Whipple brought them into Perth, and then they came aboard. We had about 600 of them, I believe. So then from there we went to Adelaide, where we took you fellows later. And there we dumped off the rest of the Australian troops. And we couldn't get water. We were short of water. We couldn't get water because they had a drought in Australia that year. But we did get some fuel oil, which we needed. And from there we went into Wellington, New Zealand, and got water. And from there we went back to the United States. We got into the United States on the, I think it was the 4th of April, just 10 months from the day we left Frisco to start with. So we had around the world in 300 days. I think here's another picture of the Washington, and this is a picture of it. Pass this the other way. This was taken at night. This is a later photograph because it has the American flags painted on it. This was prior to when the Navy took it over. So we got back into Frisco, and we had no idea what was going to happen next. But the first thing we knew, we started getting some Army troops aboard. And after a day of troops coming aboard, I discovered Company C was in this group. So after scouting around, I ran into Charlie Schaefer here and Bud Merline, and they started giving me the names of all of the fellows that I possibly knew. And there were about 24, 25 fellows that I knew at that time that were in this group. So anyway, as we were taking troops on, and you can imagine with 5,000 Army guys who had never been to sea get aboard a ship, the first thing you know, everybody is all over the place. No matter where you went, you'd run into Army guys. Well, so I was coming off watch about we left the harbor about 6 o'clock, and I was coming off the 8 o'clock watch, and I was going down, I think it was C deck, and I just happened to go by a compartment, and a couple of guys come tearing out. Abandon ship, ship is sinking. And I thought, my gosh, what's going on? So I stuck my head in the compartment, and what I found out had happened, when we had life rafts put on the ship, they put a sort of a little hook, they welded a hook onto the side of the ship. The life raft sat in that hook, and then it was fastened with lines up to the rail at the top of the ship. What had happened with the listing as we were rolling going out of Frisco, one of the life rafts got unhooked and was swinging out. And every time the ship would tilt, it would swing out. When the ship would come back, it would hit the side of the ship. Well, all of the port lights were supposed to be closed. On board the ship, there are 2 port lights. One is made of glass, and the other one is made of cast iron. And the cast iron one is supposed to be dead bolted down. Well, somebody wanted to see out at the sea, and they left the dead light out and just had the glass one in. When this raft swung out and came back, it happened to hit the glass, broke the glass, and the glass went right across the room. And I just discovered tonight that Steve here was one of the victims. He got cut by some of that glass. So all we had to do was put the dead light down and bolt it down, and it was all set. The fellows that came aboard were asking me statistics on the ship. How big is it? So on. Well, I could tell them it was 705 feet long, but what does that mean? It was 40 feet, or over 75 feet wide, took 32 feet of water, and the mast was 195 feet. Well, does this tell you anything? So I thought, well, I'll give you a visual picture. If we took the Mount Vernon and put it on Main Street here in Oconto, and if we put the stern right at Park Avenue, right on the street, the bow would be just a little short of the First National Bank. And for the width, the street is 66 feet wide from storefront to storefront. We were about 75, so we were about 10 feet wider than the street. The promenade deck, which is the top deck that the passengers are supposed to be on, and in this picture you might, it's a deck that's all, I don't think everybody can see it, but it's a deck that's fully enclosed and you can walk around the ship. That deck is about as high as the Oddfellows building on Main Street. If you stood on top of the Oddfellows building, you'd be just about on the promenade deck. The mast is higher than the radio antenna on top of our water tower. So that'll give you kind of a visual picture of how big the Mount Vernon was. But what if you took all of the people in Oconto and put them in that space? And also the people from Pensacola, Brookside, and Abrams, and put them in that space. That's what we had. We were carrying 5,200 troops and about 650 Navy personnel. But of course, on board ship, they were spread on 5 different decks. They weren't all on one level. Now, as a civilian line, I have some pictures here. They're small. You'll have to pass them around. Has this been around?
Yeah.
Here's a picture of the dining room, the grand salon, a smoking room, and a Chinese room. And here's another one that has the library, a deck stateroom, and we also had an indoor pool, but these fellows never saw it because it was filled with bunks. And then there's a picture, a long shot of the promenade deck, and that deck, if you walked around it 5 times, was a mile.
Yeah, I remember that.
When we left Frisco, we were in a convoy with 8 other ships and a Navy cruiser, the Indianapolis. There was always the fear that Japanese subs were hanging along the coastline, and because that's where the traffic would be concentrated, and it'd give them a good chance to shoot off their torpedoes. So we had this escort, but after we got out a ways, we had to go the same speed as a convoy, which at that time was about 10 knots, and we could go much faster. So I think it was about the second day out of there, we left the convoy and we went up to our normal speed of 20 knots, and we went on. We had nothing of particular incidents happen the rest of the way. We got down to the equator, and at the equator we crossed it, at 150 degrees .05 west, which is about 750 miles southeast of Hilo, Hawaii. And of course we had the usual ceremonies that go with crossing the equator, initiation. We have several small pictures here that you can look at. Here's one of the royal court. We have a pollywog operation. On the pollywog operation, look very carefully. There's a shellback administering a hypodermic needle, and the needle is about this long and about that big around. And then one of the things in the ceremony is kissing the royal baby. So the royal baby happened to be about 40 years old and about 280 pounds. But anyway, this is a picture of it. Go either way. And here are more pictures. Send this one the other way, maybe. The crossing of the equator ceremonies can get pretty rough. And I know the first one we attended, the captain had to call general quarters to stop it because he was afraid that everybody's going to get killed. And sometime later on another trip, we took a load of Army nurses to Sydney. And when they crossed the equator, they put on their own initiation. And they had a girl on the operating table, and they were operating on her, and I thought that girl would never survive. My gosh, they were rubbing her head and poking her, rubbing her arms, another was rubbing this arm. They had a sheet over her, and one was digging underneath and pull out a brassiere, pull out a panty, pull out, they kept pulling stuff out. They must have a bag full in there. And then in the end, they pulled out 2 little baby dolls. We finally got to Adelaide, and this has a little map that shows you where Adelaide is. I dare say most people wouldn't know where it is. It's way on the south end of Australia. And there are a few pictures there that the fellows that were in Adelaide would probably like to see, because I'm sure they didn't get liberty there. They got sent up cross country right away. So I think you'll enjoy seeing those. I forgot one little incident that happened when we were coming down after we had crossed the equator. We were going toward Australia. We got an alert one day on the radar. They thought they had spotted some airplanes. So of course general quarters was called, and everybody had to go inside, because if the strafing occurred, they didn't want people outside, because under the metal, ordinary machine gun bullets wouldn't penetrate and personnel would be safer. And my job at that time was I had to operate a firefighting equipment in one of the after compartments. So while we were sitting there listening to hear any sound of a motor coming up, airplane coming, and we're listening so quietly, and everybody was just intent. One of the Army guys piped up, "Anybody want to buy a watch?"
Thanks very much, Norm. I'm sure that brought back a lot of memories for most of us. There was one point you mentioned, did you say that we didn't stay in Adelaide, or your group didn't stay?
No, I don't know where you went.
We definitely stayed in Adelaide.
Oh, you did?
Oh, we had a good time there.
Oh, well, you knew more about it than I did, because I only had a couple of days there.
Yeah, so we had a good time. Now, I don't want to get to be called a sexist in any way, I didn't introduce Mary. Mary, this is Mary Wacko, Norman's wife. You stand up now and say we all get a good view.
Oh, I think they've had a view.
Now, we have two enemy here tonight. I'm sure you know who they are, but I'd like to have the two Marines stand up, All right, that's so much for the Marines. Now we'll get back to we have also two past presidents in the 32nd Association, and I think the company C is very unusual in this respect. I believe most companies would be very proud to have one. We just have two. That just shows how good. Anyway, Steve was our first vice president in 1975. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, 1975.
Would you like to say a couple words, give them an idea of what's up and so on?
That's enough. It's going to be that way. Inasmuch as I'm a past president, and it's a lifetime job to recruit membership. If any of you men are not members, just see myself or Kenny, and the fee is $2 for life, and you'll never have to pay another dime, and you'll get. Right now, they're sending you 3 papers a year telling you all about any activities that's interesting to the veterans of the 32nd, and then once a year they have a convention and reunion throughout Wisconsin and Michigan, and you're all welcome, and you all have a good time. Thank you.
Now, like I said before, we had two past presidents. The outgoing president, past president of the National was last year, was Ken Woodowitz. Let's hear from Ken.
I dare say it was an honor for me to be president of the Red Arrow Association, which is veterans of the best division in the Army. But I'm doubly proud to be part of Company C and part of this group here, which I consider was the best group in that division. I'm sure you'll all agree with me on that. I'd just like to take a minute here to thank some people that threw a great party for me when I was made president. Howard spent a good number of hours locating friends and stuff to come and attend this party. And I want to thank Charlie for taking nice pictures of it. I want to thank everybody that attended that party. I'm thanking you now. I couldn't do it at the party because I wasn't there.
Thanks a lot. We don't want to forget too that we have one of our officers here. There's quite a story behind Lieutenant Blanchette here. Last night he told many of you about the ranger team that he trained. I was part of it, so I remember. But I was luckier than he was. I think it was 4 weeks training, wasn't it? 4 weeks. At the end of 4 weeks, our trainer here ended up in the hospital, and that put him out of commission in the war. So you can see it was rough. It was very rough. But I wanted you to remember and to think that Lieutenant Blanchette is still with us. We call him Bud. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing the same thing all over again. I missed your wife. Would you mind stand up?
Oh, no!
Oh, yeah. I found out something very interesting last night about his wife.
weren't you?
Stand up. Wait, she also was Army, and I didn't know this. I just found out. She was a, was it lieutenant, captain?
Oh, I was captain.
Second.
This is a little problem he had. He said he's first and she's second. She was a nurse's corps. There's, perhaps we're talking about all the little incidences that's a dandy. The different incidences that we have had and we've seen, different things that happen to each one of us. It's just like to know if some of you fellows have something particularly interesting you'd like to tell us. Now, before I go any farther, I know some of you men. I don't want no life histories. No life history. These are the little short things that sometimes happen. If there's something that you especially like to tell, even if your wife is around, how about it? Down the line here. I know there's lots of stories out there. I could tell a few, but I don't dare tell them because it's
Tell about your operation?
You want to tell about your operation? Go ahead. Hey, what's the matter? Everybody's quiet tonight. Mike, you might have a few things to say.
Well, the only one I can think of is one time Paul Shank and I went into Brisbane, and we latched on a couple of gals that were there, and it turned out that one was Betty Grable, and the other one was Lana Turner. And Lana said, don't tell anyone because he's married to Artie Shaw that time. That's all, the only story I got.
This brings to mind something. I don't think I've ever told it. I'm sure I haven't. This is something that happened to me, you won't believe, and it's straight back. Once, me and another fellow, what? There was two of us went into town, another fellow and myself, when we were in, I'll say San Francisco, and we got picked up in a nice yellow convertible, and the convertible was driven by a man, and he had two girls in the car. And we were riding along, and they were whispering up in the front. And finally, the gentleman behind the wheel, he turned on and he said, would you fellows like to go out tonight? And he says, I've got work to do. And he said, I've got to get back. And he says, I'm working 2 shifts. And he gives him the story. All right. So it just happened. We're in pretty good restriction at that time. I was in Dibble Hospital. Dibble didn't give me nothing. If you went into town, you had to be back by 9 o'clock at night. So we talked to Warren and all the rest. Well, he says, if it's money you want, don't worry about money. It was, handed it to him. Well, that was a temptation, but still, we just felt we'd be stuck because once we would violate this 9 o'clock deal, if you violated, you got no more passes. And of course, that was it. Now, the girl in the middle was a blonde girl, very nice girl, maybe about 19 years old. The other girl was a little bit older. So, this is finally some help. And we got this one. But you know what I found out? It's not as good as that. You all know Marilyn Monroe. And we turned her down.
Sure you did.
I did win. They were showing that you were Marilyn Monroe.
I don't think I should.
And all of a sudden, on flashed his car with the man and the other woman. The other woman was
This guy had a torch because the lights were
and she said in there, I remember Marilyn today, this was the finest car she ever owned. And it showed this yellow convertible. Now just think, if I'd have run into Marilyn Monroe, I'd have been Mr. Monroe. All right, any other stories?
Yeah. My guard angel says, you can tell her, but be careful. First of all, I was with Paul Shank in that first battle. Quite a few lost their lives. I was a casualty. And my good friend, Paul Shank, helped me out of the jungle. So all the misery my wife went through, he is responsible indirectly. As the story goes, I spent a lot of time in the hospital. And every operation I had on the arm, it left it that much shorter. The more you take out, the shorter it gets. And my doctor said, now, calm, as they call me, you got got another short arm. So when they have short arm inspection, make sure you present the right one.
I know this is the main bailiwick and whatever, but I just wanted to tell you that I had the privilege of serving as president of the ladies, the National Ladies, the same year as Ken was president of the men's organization. And I would like to also say to any of you ladies who may not be members of the National Ladies of Auxiliary, it's only $2 for a lifetime membership, and they do write in the paper about the things that the the ladies do. We always have a craft table that we work at the reunion, and we have a free luncheon for the ladies when you come as part of your packet. So I'd like to invite any of you who are not members to join. I'd be glad to take $2 and see that it gets to the right person. And we hope that someday we'll see you at the reunions. Next year it's going to be in Grand Rapids.
Right.
Grand Rapids. So you come and visit us in Michigan.
I mean, as long as we keep this on a humorous, I don't think we ought to go into the history of what great heroes we were of anything. But I have a kind of a humorous story. When we were in Camp Cable, you know how the tents were all spread out. You know, we went out in angles away from the road there, and we were on the very last tent. And Royal Taylor, and I forget who else was in our tent. I think Belugi. And but anyway, this was on a Sunday morning, and Taylor comes in real late. And he's in my tent. I said, "Where the hell were you last night?" He said, "Oh," he said, "we were in this little town, and Belugi and I, well, it's Baylog, I guess is his right thing." He said, "We bought a car." And we bought a car. He said, "Yeah," he said, was on Sunday morning. He said, "I'll drive you over to church." You know, the chapel was away over on the other side of the area. So we go out and we get in the car. It was an old English rugby. And we get in the car, and you know, they had this vinyl roof. I don't know what it was then, but it was like a vinyl roof. It had rained the night before, and it started, and it go chug chug, and all this water came down on us in the seat. Anyway, we couldn't get the car going, so we had to drive, walk. You know, we cut across that long area over to where the regimental chapel was. Anyway, when we came back, the person we knew that the captain and had sent whoever was on charge of the CD that day to get a hold of both of them, and they brought them up. Anyway, when Taylor comes back, he said, well, they had to get rid of the car. They had to sell the car to get rid of it because we were not supposed to have it there. So there were some workmen working on a project down the road, you know, going toward the Tambourine Mountains, you know, the way that road went down there. So anyway, I think they sold it for whatever it was, £4 or something. But they had bought this car while they were drunk in this little town to get home that night. I don't know if anyone else knew about that, but we knew it.
For many years, I wondered what you guys did with that car. I never did know. Just till now, just till today. I never did know.
Baylog had the car.
Yeah. Hey.
Who's got the next one? I know there's a few more kicking around.
What was it? Yeah.
Norm?
When we got into Wellington on our trip around the world, we had Liberty there, or at least I did, and we got in about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was by the time we got off the ship, it was dark, and of course, with wartime conditions, they had what they call brownout. The streetcars had a little light about that big on the front. You could only see if you're 10 feet from it. And so anyway, we found our way up to what would be the equivalent of a USO here. It was a New Zealand service organization. And so we got up there, and they were over there when they have a dance. They quit in the middle of the dance and serve a supper. So we just happened to get there at supper time, and we walked in and we sat down, chatted with a few gals. Finally, one gal came over by me and she started asking questions. And she said, "Well, what do you think of New Zealand?" I said, gosh, I don't know. All I've seen is blackout. Well, what do you think of the people? And I said, well, gee, what I've seen so far, fine. She just kept hounding me for questions, one after the other, and I couldn't answer a one. And finally I said, listen, I said, you've been interrogating me. I said, let me ask you a question. And she says, all right. I said, now that you've seen the Yanks, what do you think of them? She looked at me. She said, you want the truth? I said, well, of course I want the truth. Well, you're not a bit like Clark Gable.
Most of you, I think, remember Rockhampton. We were in the what we call the Fox Farm. Many of us were in. I know Chaz was in there. I was in. I don't know if Bob ever got there or not. But at Rockhampton, we had it pretty nice. But I remember we had a group. We had a lantern hanging in the light. We had a group in there. And one of the fellows was a city man, a really small man. And that was night. He always got back in early. He always got back to his tent first. You know, and he never was late. And of course, the last man that came in always turned off the lantern. Now, this is one of these old farm lanterns that us farmers know about, but the city people apparently didn't know anything about it. So it was hanging on a nail in the center post. This one night, something delayed him, and he came in late. And we were all near in their phones. You know. Pretty soon we seen him come out and gets ready for bed. Calls for bed. And so he goes, "Well, fella, nothing's good for us over the light. It's dead." He looks at this stupid thing, and he starts blowing on it, blowing. And somebody says, raise the lamp, raise the flash, you know. I can't remember what you call it anyway. So he did. He attempted to anyway. He grabbed his hand, grabbed that hot, put it up, and he dropped the lantern on the floor. And he reached up and he picked up the lantern went out in the meantime, and he's trying to hang it on the hook. And this is what you hear. He goes, couldn't find the nail. Put it down on the floor, and he says, dear God, I tried so hard to be good, but you keep putting obstacles in my path. All right, anyone else, guys?
That piece of glass is called a chimney.
Yeah. Now we get back to something perhaps a little more serious. Not, but a little more serious. We talked last night about the possibility of having the next reunion more centralized. And I said, no, it's been 20 years about this coming up here. And I feel there's some of these, especially the Southerners or the Mid-South, Southwest, Southeast, would be more apt to get to a reunion if we could move it into a place that was a little more close to home. And Steve had suggested Bryan, Ohio, right? Which Bryan is quite a ways farther down than we are, of course. It's not too far. And I'm seriously thinking, as I mentioned last night, of writing to each one of the members, and especially the members that do not get up to these reunions. And these are the people I'm trying to get a hold of. You people do come. In fact, the majority of you have been here before. These people down there, and there's many of them that come from down, I would say Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, generally down in that area. We have many men, and they do not make reunions, and I believe that they would come if we had a reunion much closer to their home. Now, I'm 74 years old. I'm not bragging, not complaining. I'm 64. And I feel that the youngest man here, I would say, was about 65, am I right? Just about. So, in another 4 or 5 years, or 10 years, these people is going to get to the point where the majority of us are not going to be able to travel. I would like to see these fellows down south at least attend one reunion while they still can. They will never apparently get up this far, and the older they get, the more unlikely it is that they're ever going to go up this far. So I would like to drop a line to each one of these, especially these men, and ask them their opinion. I talked to you about it last night. I'm sure most of you would come regardless where it was, because we've been doing this for years. But this is what I intend to do.
John Burby. I'm 1 year old when I moved to Ocado. I was 19 when I left Ocado. And I marched out with the rest of the town. And I would like to say there is no place like home. I just would not feel right to come to a reunion for Company C of Ocado, Wisconsin, unless it was in Ocado. I've never been disappointed, never been more appreciative of meeting the people. There aren't too many of us left.
That's true.
And it's my opinion, but it doesn't mean any more than what I'm saying. I live in Greendale, Wisconsin, which is 140 miles, 50, 60 miles from here. Makes no difference. As long as I know I'm going to come to Ocado, see you, Red Lane, any other fellow. That's my feeling.
John, what I was getting at was, I do not mean we would move it completely from Ocado.
Oh,
No, that's not what I'm after. I enjoyed it very much so. But I thought perhaps if we had put one reunion in to try and bring in some of this house, say one reunion. Now, we could return to the next reunion if we wanted to here, or we could continue down there. But I just would like to see, I know so many of these fellows that we've been trying to get prices came down once. Once he came down. But there's many. There's Naylor, Morgan, some of these names. I got a whole list of here I can go through. And there's a block of them down, a solid block we knew very well. We knew very well they were wonderful men. But they just do not get up here. Now, why? I don't know. But I know when they're 5 years older, they're not more likely to come up. They're less likely to come up. But I'm going to try this anyway. This does not mean that it's going to move out of Ocado. But I'm going to try this and see if we couldn't get some of the suburbs especially to come down.
Howard, before you do get into that, I think you should send out flyers to see if